Hey everyone. I'm going to be talking about Prison Poems by Daniel Berrigan today. I picked up this book without actually knowing anything about it. And then I looked up the author, and it turns out that he was an activist around a bunch of things, but when he wrote this book around the Vietnam War, and he actually wrote the poems in this book while he was in prison for burning draft papers during the Vietnam War. So pretty amazing guy. He was a priest, like a Catholic priest. Actually, I don't know if he was. I don't think he was a priest. I can't remember. I'm like a full-on heathen, so I can never remember like which religious leaders' names go with which religions. But he was a leader in whatever Catholic sect he was in, and it was like a certain subsect of Catholicness. Anyway, the point is, it seems like he was actually a good Christian and a pretty big deal activist, and didn't just talk about things, but like put his body on the line in some very real ways more than once. And this was not actually the only time he went to prison for doing something like this. But anyway, so he wrote these poems while he was in prison for burning draft papers. And I really like poetry a lot. I write poetry. I read a lot of poetry. I will say, I didn't love this as a collection of poems, like as a body of writing. Um, I think that some people might. I think that people that are more into like maybe beat style, or that era maybe would connect with it a little bit more than I did. I just found it to be a little bit too old school lefty hippie, which I like all of the things involved in that. I just don't always like the writing style. But they were some really amazing lines, which I'll read to you some of my favorites. But one of the things I really liked about it is that he just voiced these connections that all these other like prison abolitionist scholars have been saying forever. But just to hear that echoed in his writing, concepts of like freedom dreaming and like some of the hopeful things of like they can take literally everything. They can take your physical body, but they can't take like your brain and your ability to dream up a better future that we actually deserve to live in. So that was cool. But then also other themes, um, just more devastating themes that abolitionists bring up about just the connection between the prison industrial complex and war and exploitation and racism and homophobia and sexism and religion and capitalism and more capitalism. He just touches on all those things. And just to see it echoed again, but from a different time period was cool, and sad, but cool. Um, I also learned a couple things about the Vietnam War that I didn't know that much about. Like, he talks about a lot about the My Lai massacre, which was a genocidal massacre that the United States military did to civilians and in Vietnam. And he has a line in there which I couldn't find. I like re-looked through to try and find it so that I could read it, but there's a line in there where someone's questioning in the poem. They're like, even the babies? And then the response is, even the babies. Which I just thought that pairing, the simplicity of it was just devastating. Another thing that he really hits on in this book, which I can relate to a lot because I'm a teacher and a parent, and even before I was a parent and even before I was a teacher, I just really care a lot about children, and like everybody cares about children, but like I just think that if we're not protecting kids, we've completely failed as a society. And he has a bunch of lines in here where he just there's one right here, like at the end of some of his poems, he just reminds you, like insists upon reminding you My poem concerns the death of children. My poem concerns the death of children. So it's like there's nothing unclear about his intent. Like, this is about kids getting murdered. Full stop. Period. Kids are getting murdered. There should be no other discussion about why or the reasons. That should just be the end of the conversation. But we know that it usually isn't. So I'm just going to read you some of my favorite lines from this. I'll read you. His brother also got arrested for burning draft papers with him, and also was a Christian and part of the Catholic Church in some way. It's also interesting because a lot of these poems are pretty anti-church and anti-religion and anti-Catholic Church, so that's interesting too. But I'll read you part of the foreword. It says, his brother's writing about him. I mean that he maintained a vision of nonviolent resistance, a vision of community formation, but in a deeper sense, he held on to a vision that insisted upon life. And then a little bit later down, he's talking about prison, and he says, how does a human being live in the most intensely systemized version of non-life known to humanity? And everything I've ever listened to or read or watched about prison rings true in this. Like, if freedom is life, then prison is non-life, which I think is different than death. Because I don't know, I think there can be life in death, but there's not life in the lack of all and any humanity and freedom. So I thought that was powerful, and I'll read you some of my favorite lines. They're not in any order other than how they showed up in the book, and then I dog-eared the pages I really liked. Okay. This one I just thought was really pretty. No, teach my eyes to rejoice in one sugaring unbudded tree, one star framed in a barred window, broad existence narrowed to a keeper's eye. It just made me think of, like, the vastness of what is possible in the world and through life just being shrunk down literally by prison, and through this prison window that's small, but also like by oppression generally, like the possibility of life and the creative possibility of the universe just being stifled by the constraints that, like, oppressive systems put upon the world. Another line, I just like that it sort of connected to me too. I'm a vegan, and I think a lot about how the animal oppression system and capitalism fits into all these other things. And I don't know that he was trying to make that connection, like, overtly, but I found it in this line. It just says, carving the breathing earth like a turkey corpse. So again, like, thinking of the earth as this breathing thing full of life and possibility, and then just murdering it. I also, there wasn't a climate crisis at this time, or there was, but it wasn't spoken about too much. But there's always been environmental crises, and he does touch on those sort of metaphors a bunch of times of, like, abusing the earth. Comes up a few times. Okay, then this one I underlined, not because it was like a great line or anything, although it is kind of a great line. Anyway, the last line of one of these poems just says, nothing ever happens here. And again, one of the things that I have read, and also that I actually heard from a student who was in, not prison, but in juvenile detention, which is like, it's so boring. There's nothing to do. You're not allowed to do anything, which is a form of torture. But yeah, there's just like nothing ever happens. It's just boredom to a level that is pure torture. And one of the kid that I'm thinking of actually said, it was like, it would actually be better if we were allowed to kill ourselves, because like, what are we doing now? Like, this is just like nothingness. Another line, and this line kind of goes into his, like, he's a very religious man, but who has these sort of I don't know what to call it, but anyway, I'll just read this. The bad news drones on, plague after seventh plague, hypnotic, futile as an argument for God's existence. I'm not even sure exactly how to interpret that line, but I really liked it. As a very non-religious person, it's interesting for me to hear about people who seem to be really amazing activists, but the tool that they use for that, or the channel they use for that, is the church or religion, because it's not, in my mind, it's not at all the avenue that I would think of to be the most effective. So, and that's not me saying like, oh, it's bad, but it isn't what comes to mind for me. So then it's always interesting for me to learn about like amazing activists who that was like their sort of vehicle for their activism. This goes back to the kids, but it also goes back in this idea of like patriarchy and abusive fathers and like paternalistic abuse. It says, appalled I think of the children gotten by fathers whose veins throb for the world's jugular. Which, yeah, I thought that was beautiful and intense. That was in a poem that was about his actual dad, as his dad was dying, and his dad actually was religious too, but seems like was a really abusive and horrible person that was awful to his kids. I think that might be the longest poem in the book. And then this one is sort of this one's sort of playing on it's not playing on anything. This one sort of plays with suicidal thoughts, and the opening line I really liked. It just says, it may be expedient to lose everything. Which, yeah, I mean, I would also be thinking that if I was in prison. Prison is a bad place. And, yeah, I would also be thinking about suicide if I was in prison. Then this part really connected, I think, with, like, prison and industrial complex, and, what is the other industrial? Something industrial. War industrial? That's not the word. Whatever. War, and how it is used for capitalism. It says, day and night for slave wages, the prisoners make war instruments to drop on Vietnamese peasants. Yeah. Okay. This one, okay, so this line has stuck with me a lot because I've been thinking about it with all the anti-queer legislation that's been happening, and then all of the censorship that's been happening in schools of kids' books that even mention that racism existed or exists, or that enslavement happened, or that we might still be dealing with institutionalized racism in some way. And it says, the truth, they are trying to kill us. Neither hyperbole nor obsession. It is first and last truth grown by the turning locks. And, he's talking about prison in that moment because it's like the turning locks, like specifically, but also I feel like it could be thought of as a metaphor for all, oppressive enclosure and like stifling of people's freedom and ability to live. Yeah, I read this one before, but this one just stuck with me so much. My poem concerns the death of children. That was the line that stuck with me the most from the entire book, I think. So this poem was really good. This was about a prison guard who was particularly horribly abusive, but he didn't start out that way. He started out kind of somewhat to be one of the nicer prison guards, and then became the worst one. And for me, the whole poem just really shows that, like, when you're asking people to do something that is inhuman, it's like an inhuman act that you're asking them to do, then they become inhuman people, right? Like when you put a gun in somebody's hand and you say, here, go shoot a bunch of people for your country and go murder tons of people and we'll pay you for it, for your country, you can't then be surprised when that person, quote unquote, takes it too far and kills, you killed some people you weren't supposed to kill, or like, you went rogue and like killed some of our people, or you did some other hideous act, like a sexual abuse act that you weren't supposed to do. And it's like, you put a gun in someone's hands who's like 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and you told them to shoot people. You thought that was going to just be fine? You thought their brain was just going to work perfectly and they were just going to be able to like stand there with their gun and be like, that's a medic, don't shoot them, they're a medic, they have a special badge on, let's shoot and murder that person and explode their brain right in front of my face. But that guy, no, he's a medic, so I won't do it there. I'm going to show restraint while I murder people for a living. No, that's not going to go well, right? And the same thing is with the prison guard. So, you ask people to, rob people of their freedom and life all day long in a dark place with no windows, where everything is intentionally made to look sad and depressing, and the light is horrible and oppressive and gives everyone a headache, and everything echoes, so it's always loud, and people are upset because they can't see their families, and there's no art anywhere. And you think, and your job is to control those people physically by force if you have to and when you have to. And there's hideous things happening all around you, and violence and sexual abuse, and you think those people are just going to be like, I'll just do my job, I'm not going to take it too far ever, I'll just like come in here and have a big smile on my face and treat everybody really nice every single day, and I'll be so happy to come into work. No, that's not what's going to happen. People are going to become monsters because you're asking them to do something that is monstrous. That's not a normal thing that humans should be doing. It's not what we want to do as humans. It's not normal. And so the results are not going to be normal. Anyway, so the line that I like triple underlined, it says, it's talking about how he doesn't understand how this guard can like be such a good dad, seemingly. I mean, he assumes he's a good dad, but then come to work and abuse all the prisoners. So it says, I reel, seeing vision surreal. He kisses his little daughter tenderly and honors religious man, flesh of Christ, with resounding thwacks on a prisoner's bones. And then again, he comes back to this language that I think kind of connects, for me anyway, to the meat industry. And he says, he will grind men to a meat, has to, right? That's his job. And if you work in a poultry shop or a meat factory or a factory farm or a meat packing plant or what have you, that's your job. Your job is to murder things all day. And his job is to rip people's freedom away and treat them like animals all day long. and physically control their bodily autonomy. So, yeah, that's his job. That's what the government and our tax dollars are paying him to do. This next one is called strip mining, and this really goes back to the earth again. I think he really touches on this a lot of times. The crumpled faces lie in a disposal can somewhere, like a ditch at my lie. Divide so foul and nightmarish a universe in quadrants. One green slice of hell to the church, one to the state, one to the real estate industry, one to the arms race. So, yeah, just exploiting the earth for hideous purposes so people can get richer. And he throws the church in there, which again, I just think is brave and wild to me. This one I really loved too. The Confucian logic eminent to don't get sick in prison, in quotes, must be enlarged to don't get sick in America. And in this one, he's really talking about the medic and the dentist that's available to prisoners, which I know from family, friends, is a horrible system that mostly just further disables people. But I mean, generally, in the United States, this is a true statement. So I think that's all the lines that I underlined. I actually, even though all of those lines I love so much, I really didn't connect with a lot of the actual writing here. I did connect with a lot of the themes, and it felt important to read, but I actually think maybe I could have got more out of it if I had just watched a documentary about this man's life. Maybe, I don't know, there was a lot of really great thoughts in here. I just didn't like the writing style, but maybe you will. It was just too, I don't know, it was reminding me too much of beat poetry, even though it wasn't beat poetry, but it gave me like a vibe of that I'm not interested in. But maybe you will be. And if you're not, watch this video and watch a documentary about Daniel Berrigan and the Vietnam War instead. All right. Bye, everybody.